Look, sweetheart, I don't know what they told you at the recruitment office, but this is the flight line, not a powder room. The big, loud things with wings? They're dangerous. Why don't you run along and get us some coffee before you get yourself hurt? The words, dripping with the kind of condescending authority only a man supremely confident in his place in the world could muster, echoed across the shimmering tarmac of Naval Air Station Meridian Prime. The assembled ground crew, a mix of seasoned veterans and nervous new recruits, snickered. They shuffled their feet, avoiding eye contact with the target of the insult, their complicity a silent endorsement of the established pecking order. Chief Warrant Officer Gunner Gunny Thorne, a man whose personality was as loud as the jet engines he serviced, grinned, thoroughly pleased with himself. He stood with his hands on his hips, a bulldog of a man carved from years of salt spray and hydraulic fluid. The woman he addressed didn't so much as flinch. She was of average height, with her dark hair pulled back in a severe, regulation bun that did nothing to soften the sharp, intelligent lines of her face. She wore a simple, unadorned set of navy blue coveralls, stained with just enough grease and oil to suggest she was no stranger to hard work, but clean enough to look new. There were no rank insignias, no name tag, nothing to distinguish her from the most junior aviation technician on the base. Her response was a study in profound, unnerving silence. She simply continued her task, methodically checking the tension on a series of tie-down chains, securing an F/A-35 Spectre to the deck, her hands moving with an economy of motion that was almost hypnotic. The rhythmic click of the ratchet wrench was the only answer she offered. But from the observation deck of the control tower, a different kind of authority was watching. Fleet Captain Marcus Thorne, Gunny's older, more thoughtful brother, lowered his binoculars. He didn't focus on his brother's preening display. He focused on the woman. He watched her stance, the way her weight was perfectly balanced, the way her eyes scanned not just the chain in her hand, but the entire aircraft, the sky, the heat haze rising from the distant runway. It was a look of total, predatory awareness. It was a look he had seen only once before, in the middle of a sandstorm, in a place whose name was still classified. A cold dread, mingled with a dawning, electric sense of awe, began to snake its way up his spine. He knew, with absolute certainty, that his brother had just made the biggest mistake of his career. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence and proven by action, type competence in the comments below. The air at Meridian Prime was a thick cocktail of salt, humidity, and the metallic tang of jet fuel. It was a place of constant, controlled chaos, a symphony of roaring engines, barking orders, and the high-pitched whine of machinery. Today, however, an additional layer of tension was present. The Inspector General's team was on base, their crisp white uniforms and clipboards a stark contrast to the sweat-stained gear of the flight line crews. Gunny Thorne was in his element, puffing out his chest and projecting an aura of absolute command. He saw himself as the gatekeeper, the grizzled heart of the Naval Air Station, and the IG visit was his stage. The appearance of the unknown woman in the plain coveralls was an unwelcome anomaly, an unfiled flight plan in his perfectly ordered sky. His initial dismissal wasn't just arrogance. It was a territorial display. He needed to establish dominance, especially with the younger crew members watching. He continued his tirade, his voice rising to be heard over the idling auxiliary power unit of a nearby Hornet. Seriously, who cleared you for the line? Did you just wander out here from the mess hall? This is my deck. Nothing happens on my deck without my say-so. So, I'll ask you again, who the hell are you? The woman finished her final check on the tie-down, giving the chain a firm, satisfying tug. She rose slowly, turning to face him for the first time. Her eyes were a calm, slate gray, and they held his gaze without a flicker of intimidation or anger. There was nothing there but a quiet, patient assessment. The silence stretched, becoming heavier and more uncomfortable than any shouted retort could have been. The crew's nervous laughter died in their throats. They could sense a shift in the atmospheric pressure, a change that had nothing to do with the weather. The professional calm emanating from her was a force of nature in itself, a low-pressure system of competence that was beginning to suck the air out of Gunny's bluster. He mistook her silence for defiance, a fatal assumption. Oh, a silent one, are we? Too good to answer a chief warrant officer? You know, that kind of insubordination will get you a one-way ticket to scrubbing latrines for a month. He took a step closer, invading her personal space, a classic intimidation tactic that had worked on countless young sailors. He was about to press his point, to demand her name and unit, when a frantic squawk erupted from the flight deck's communication system, a sound that cut through the air with the sharp edge of pure panic. The voice that crackled over the speakers was young, strained, and terrified. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Spectre, 7, this is Ghost 1. I have a complete hydraulic failure. I repeat, complete cascading failure. Flight control systems are shot. I'm flying a dead stick. A collective chill ran through every person on the flight line. Dead stick, landing a jet with no hydraulic power to the control surfaces was a pilot's worst nightmare. It was less like flying and more like guiding a multi-million-dollar brick to the ground with nothing but prayer and minuscule adjustments to engine thrust. For an F/A-35, a marvel of fly-by-wire technology utterly dependent on its computer-controlled systems, it was considered a virtual impossibility. It was a death sentence. Panic erupted. People started shouting, running towards emergency stations. In the tower, controllers were yelling conflicting instructions. The carefully orchestrated ballet of the flight line devolved into a frantic scramble. Gunny Thorne, for all his bluster, was frozen. This was a crisis beyond his experience, a situation for which no checklist existed. He stared at the sky, his face pale, his authority evaporating like spilled fuel on hot asphalt. But the woman in the simple coveralls did not panic. She didn't run. She moved with a purpose that was both terrifying and beautiful to behold. She strode directly to the flight line's primary communication console, a post usually manned by a senior petty officer. The man currently there looked at her, his eyes wide with fear. She didn't speak. She simply held out her hand. It was not a request. It was a command. Dumbfounded, the sailor relinquished the headset. She slipped it on, her movements fluid and sure. Her other hand flew across the console, fingers dancing over buttons and switches with a familiarity that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. She bypassed the chaotic tower frequency, patching directly into the pilot's emergency channel. Her voice, when it finally came, was the complete antithesis of the panic gripping the base. It was calm, steady, and devoid of any emotion except for a profound, absolute control. Ghost 1, this is Meridian Prime Ground. I have you. Disregard the tower. You will listen only to me. State your current altitude and airspeed. The pilot's ragged breathing came over the channel. Altitude 3,000. Airspeed dropping through 220 knots. The stick is a rock. Who is this? Who am I talking to? He was seconds from ejecting, from sending a $250 million asset crashing into the sea. The woman's voice never wavered. My name is not important, son. What is important is that I'm going to bring you home. Now listen carefully. We're going to perform a controlled alpha approach. You're going to use differential thrust for directional control. Do you understand me? There was a moment of shocked silence from the cockpit. A controlled alpha approach in a fifth-generation fighter with no hydraulics was a maneuver straight out of theoretical test pilot manuals. No one had ever successfully performed one in a real-world emergency. It required a level of skill and precision that was almost superhuman, both from the pilot and the person guiding him. Gunny Thorne stared, his mouth agape. He understood enough of the terminology to know that what she was suggesting was insane. It was like telling a man falling off a cliff to flap his arms and fly. Yet, the pilot, hearing the impossible confidence in her voice, latched onto it like a lifeline. I understand for the next 7 minutes. The woman orchestrated a masterpiece of aviation. She became the jet's brain, its nervous system. Her instructions were a quiet, rhythmic litany of technical precision. Nudge the left throttle. Just a touch. Bring the nose up 2 degrees. Easy. Let her settle. You're high. Cut power slightly. Watch your descent rate. You're my eyes, Ghost 1. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you feel. She was painting a picture for him, building a pathway of calm through his storm of terror. On the ground, everyone had stopped. The IG inspectors, the frantic ground crews, Gunny Thorne. All of them stood transfixed, their eyes glued to the tiny speck in the sky that was the crippled F/A-35. They listened to her voice, a serene island in an ocean of fear. The jet wobbled. It dipped. It seemed to hang in the air on a thread of sheer willpower. And then, impossibly, it was on final approach, wings level, gear down, lined up with the runway. With a final, gentle instruction from the woman, the pilot flared at the last possible second. The Spectre slammed onto the runway with a terrifying shriek of tortured metal and rubber, but it was down. It was on the ground. It skidded, trailing smoke and sparks, but it held the center line and screeched to a halt less than 100 yards from the end of the tarmac. A deafening silence fell over Meridian Prime, a silence far more profound than the preceding chaos. It was a silence born of awe, of witnessing the impossible made real. Into that sacred silence strode Captain Marcus Thorne. He had sprinted down from the tower the moment he heard her voice on the comms, his heart pounding in his chest. He ignored the stunned crowd, his eyes locked on the woman who was now calmly removing the headset, her expression as placid as if she had just finished a crossword puzzle. He came to a halt 3 feet in front of her, his posture ramrod straight. The pilot was climbing shakily from the cockpit, medics rushing towards him. The fire crews were already dousing the smoldering landing gear. But the real event, the true climax of the drama, was happening right here between the captain, the unknown woman, and the utterly broken chief warrant officer. Gunny Thorne watched his brother, his mind unable to process what was happening. He expected the captain to commend him, to take charge, to demand answers. Instead, Captain Thorne's eyes were fixed on the woman with an expression of profound, undiluted reverence. Then, he did something that shattered Gunny's entire understanding of the world. Captain Marcus Thorne, a decorated fleet officer with 30 years of service, snapped to the most rigid, perfect salute Gunny had ever seen. He didn't salute the pilot. He didn't salute the flag. He saluted the woman in the greasy coveralls. Admiral Rostova. Captain Thorne's voice was crisp, formal, and loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You have the deck, ma'am." The title hung in the air, charged with unbelievable weight. "Admiral." The word ricocheted through the crowd, a shockwave of understanding. Gunny's face went from pale to sheet white. His knees felt weak. The woman, the Admiral, simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in return. It was not a dismissal, but an acknowledgement. She had not needed the salute, the title, or the recognition. Her competence was her rank. Her actions were her authority. The salute was for everyone else. It was the formal validation of the miracle they had all just witnessed. Captain Thorne lowered his salute, but kept his eyes on Admiral Rostova. He pulled a datapad from his belt, his thumb moving swiftly across the screen. He turned not to the Admiral, but to the assembled, dumbstruck crowd, his gaze finally settling on his younger brother. "For those of you who are confused," he began, his voice cold and hard as forged steel, "allow me to clarify who you have been speaking to this morning." He held up the datapad, and the Admiral's official service record glowed on the screen. "This is Rear Admiral Eva Rostova. Call sign, Nix, a name I'm sure some of our senior aviators will recognize from the Gulf. She has over 12,000 flight hours, the vast majority of them in experimental and high-performance tactical aircraft. She has more carrier landings than any 3 pilots on this base combined. Her combat sorties are largely classified, but I can tell you she holds the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Silver Star, and a Navy Cross for actions you wouldn't believe if I read them to you." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "She was the lead test pilot for the F/A-35 Spectre program. She didn't just read the manual on a controlled alpha dead stick landing. She wrote the damn thing after being the first and only person to ever successfully perform the maneuver in a simulation. Until today," he looked directly at Gunny, and for the first time, there was a flicker of pity in his eyes. "She is also, as of 0600 this morning, the new commanding officer of Naval Air Station Meridian Prime. She was performing a personal, hands-on inspection of the flight line to get the measure of her new command. Not as an admiral, but as a technician. She wanted to see the base from the ground up." He deactivated the datapad. "Chief Thorne," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You asked her who she was. You demanded to know her authority. She just showed you. Her authority is competence. Her rank is a consequence of that competence, not the source of it. You would do well to remember that Gunny Thorne stood paralyzed, the world tilting on its axis. The woman he had dismissed, insulted, and tried to humiliate was not just his superior. She was a living legend. He had tried to order a Titan to fetch him coffee. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, burning weight in his chest that made it hard to breathe. He finally understood the silence. It wasn't defiance. It was patience. It was the profound calm of a professional who had nothing to prove to anyone, least of all to him. The story of what happened on the flight line that morning spread through Meridian Prime not like wildfire, but like a sonic boom. It was instant, overwhelming, and it fundamentally altered the landscape. By lunchtime, every sailor, from the cooks in the galley to the intelligence officers in the secure hangars, knew the tale. They called it Nix's Landing. They spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the quiet woman in the coveralls who had talked a falling star out of the sky. The legend grew with each telling. Some said she never blinked. Some said they saw her hands moving over the console in a blur, anticipating the pilot's needs before he even knew them himself. The narrative was always the same. A quiet professional had arrived, and in a single, undeniable act, had redefined the very meaning of authority on the base. Gunny Thorne was not officially reprimanded. Admiral Rostova never filed a report. She never mentioned the incident again. This, in many ways, was a far more profound punishment than any official censure. Her silence on the matter forced him to confront the full magnitude of his own arrogance. The next morning, Gunny Thorne waited outside the Admiral's new office from 0500. When she arrived, dressed in her immaculate Admiral's uniform, he didn't speak. He simply snapped to attention and rendered the sharpest salute of his life. She paused, looked him in the eye, and gave that same small, patient nod. "Carry on, Chief," she said, her voice as calm as it had been on the radio. That was all. But in that small interaction, a universe of understanding passed between them. Gunny Thorne changed. The bluster was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. He started listening more than he talked. He began judging the sailors under his command not by their swagger or their bravado, but by the quiet competence of their work. He was often seen mentoring young technicians, both male and female, and his favorite piece of advice became a new mantra on the flight line. "Don't tell me how good you are. Show me." The flight line itself changed. A new sense of purpose took hold. The standard of excellence, already high, was elevated to a near-religious pursuit. The crews worked with a new precision, a shared understanding that their ultimate commander was not some distant figurehead in an office, but a master of their craft who could walk onto the deck at any moment and do their job better than they could. The impact of Admiral Rostova's leadership was felt far beyond the flight line. She led Meridian Prime the same way she had landed that crippled jet, with quiet competence, absolute precision, and an unwavering focus on the mission. She cut through bureaucratic red tape, streamlined supply chains, and improved living conditions for the enlisted personnel. She never raised her voice. She never needed to. Her presence was enough. A formal request from her had more weight than a shouted order from any other commander. She had earned a level of respect that transcended rank. People didn't follow her orders because of the stars on her collar. They followed her because they knew, with absolute certainty, that she was the most capable person in the room. The spot where Ghost 1 had screeched to a halt was unofficially christened Rostova's Point. It became a landmark. New pilots, fresh out of training, would taxi past it, and their instructors would tell them the story. It was a lesson not just in aviation, but in humility. It was a reminder that the most unassuming person on the base might just be the one who could save your life. Gunny Thorne, in a private act of penance and respect, personally fabricated a small, discreet brass plaque. It didn't bear the Admiral's name. That would have been too ostentatious for her style. It simply read, "The standard is competence. All else is noise." He mounted it on the wall of the main maintenance hangar, where every technician would see it as they started their shift. It became the base's unofficial motto, a distillation of the new culture that had taken root. The legend of Nix's Landing became a part of the institutional fabric of the Navy, a story told at officer candidate school and in the ready rooms of carriers across the globe. It was a modern myth about the triumph of skill over assumption, a powerful testament to the idea that true authority is not claimed, but demonstrated. It was a story about a quiet professional who, in 7 minutes of impossible calm, reminded an entire naval air station what true strength looked like. Months turned into a year. Under Admiral Rostova's command, NAS Meridian Prime transformed from a standard, effective military installation into a beacon of excellence. It became the most sought-after posting in the fleet, a place where professional merit was the only currency that mattered. The culture of loud, superficial arrogance, once embodied by men like the old Gunny Thorne, had been replaced by a pervasive, shared ethos of quiet professionalism. Young sailors and officers learned from day one that their worth would be measured not by the volume of their voice or the shine on their boots, but by the precision of their work and the steadfastness of their character. The change was palpable. Efficiency ratings soared. Mission readiness was at an all-time high. Accidents and mishaps, once a grimly accepted part of life on a busy air station, dwindled to nearly zero. The base operated with the silent, intricate precision of a fine watch, every part moving in perfect synchrony, all guided by the steady hand of a commander who led by example. Admiral Rostova was rarely seen in her formal uniform. She was more often found on the flight line in her simple coveralls, speaking quietly with a young avionics technician or in the engine shop, her hands exploring the complex heart of a turbine. She never gave grand speeches. Her legacy was not written in memos or policy directives. It was etched into the very soul of the base, into the habits and attitudes of its people. Her presence was a constant, silent reminder that assumptions are the enemy of progress, and that true respect must be earned every single day through undeniable action. The story of her first day was now a foundational myth, a teaching tool more powerful than any training manual. It was the first story every new arrival was told, a lesson in humility and a warning against the poison of prejudice. It served as a moral compass for the entire command. The true legacy of Admiral Eva Nix Rostova was not the impossible landing or the public humbling of an arrogant chief. It was the enduring culture she built. It was the idea that the quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous, that the most unassuming hands might be the most skilled, and that true leadership has nothing to do with volume and everything to do with value. Her story became a powerful symbol, a testament to the fact that competence is its own authority, and that action will always, in the end, silence words. She proved that respect is not a right of rank, but a reward for demonstrated excellence. The ripples of that one morning on the tarmac spread outwards, carried by the sailors and officers who served under her, and moved on to other commands, taking her philosophy with them. They seeded other bases, other ships, other squadrons with the simple, powerful idea that what you do will always matter more than what you say. The quiet professional archetype, once a hidden secret of elite units, became an ideal to aspire to across the service, all because one woman chose to let her actions speak for her in a moment of profound crisis. The lesson of Meridian Prime was clear. Do not mistake silence for weakness. Do not mistake humility for inexperience, and never, ever assume you know who you are talking to. For in the world of high stakes and ultimate consequences, the true titans are not those who boast of their power, but those who quietly, calmly, and professionally wield it when it matters most. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where professional skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.